The last normal morning of Ryan Whitfield's marriage looked exactly like every other morning that had come before it, which is precisely why nobody could have guessed it would be the last one. It was late September of 2005. Ryan was 29, a soft-spoken electrician from a small town outside Denver, Colorado, the kind of man who fixed what was broken and never asked for credit for it. He wasn't the loudest guy at a party or the one people remembered right away. But if you needed someone at 6 in the morning, Ryan was already there with his truck running. He answered when his mother called. He showed up early. He believed, the way a lot of quiet men do, that steadiness was its own kind of love. His wife, Emily Cross, was 27, a nurse in the pediatric ward of a hospital in Boulder. The kids on her floor didn't just tolerate her, they asked for her by name. She remembered which ones were scared of needles and which ones needed a joke before a procedure and which ones just needed someone to sit with them until a parent could get off work. Her coworkers used a word for her that people don't throw around casually in a hospital. Safe. Being around Emily felt safe. They'd met at a mutual friend's barbecue 3 years earlier, and nothing about how they fell in love was cinematic. It was slow. It was Sunday dinners and long drives with bad gas station coffee and the particular comfort of somebody who remembers how you take your eggs. By the time Ryan proposed, nobody who knew them was surprised. It felt less like a leap and more like arriving somewhere they'd already been walking toward. They married on a crisp Saturday at a small chapel outside Boulder, the kind with wildflowers instead of roses, because Emily said roses felt like they were trying too hard. A little over 90 people came, cousins from Wyoming, nurses from Emily's floor, Ryan's crew from the electrical company, old high school friends, neighbors who'd watched them fall in love from their porches. Everyone in that room saw two good, ordinary people starting a life. Nobody in that room could have imagined what was coming. Among the guests was Ryan's older brother, Nathan. Nathan was 37, 10 years older than Ryan, and had never married. He was the kind of relative people described carefully. Hard to get a read on. Keeps to himself, said with a shrug that suggested there wasn't anything sinister in it, just distance. Their parents worried about him the way parents worry about a grown son who lives alone and doesn't say much about why. Nathan had a good job, no record of trouble, and a charm he could switch on when the room needed it. At the wedding, he gave the kind of toast that made people laugh and made Emily blush, and then he faded back into the crowd of family the way he always did. Just the brother. Just a face in the photographs nobody would look at the same way again. For their honeymoon, Ryan and Emily chose Gulf Shores, Alabama. Not because it was luxurious, because it was reachable, familiar, and the kind of place where a modest paycheck could still buy you 4 good days by the water. They booked a small oceanfront hotel 2 blocks from the pier, planned nothing fancy, and told each other this trip was going to be about doing absolutely nothing that resembled real life. No invoices for Ryan. No charting for Emily. Just sand, seafood, and each other. The first 2 days delivered exactly that. They ate fried shrimp at a place with paper menus and sticky tables. They wandered gift shops full of shell necklaces and postcards nobody would ever mail. Emily had bought a little point-and-shoot camera before the wedding specifically for this trip, because she said she wanted proof. Not that life was perfect, but that it had happened. By the 3rd day, everything still felt unremarkable in the best way. Over breakfast, they talked about the drive home, about the wedding gifts still sitting in boxes in their new apartment, about which thank you notes needed writing first. Ryan mentioned, almost apologetically, that a job was waiting for him the following Monday. That afternoon, Emily put on a pale yellow sundress for a beach photo session she'd booked through a local photographer. Nothing elaborate. Just the kind of casual portrait session dozens of couples booked every week along that stretch of coast. But to Emily, it mattered. She wanted pictures that felt like them, separate from the formal wedding photos, something soft enough to hang in the home they hadn't built yet. Ryan would spend the next 19 years unable to look at those photographs without his chest caving in. In them, Emily is laughing at something off camera. Sand on her ankles. Completely unaware that within 12 hours she would become the center of a disappearance that would swallow both their lives. That evening they ate at a crowded seafood restaurant near the pier, the kind with a wait list and a bucket of crayons for kids at the next table. Emily rarely drank, but she had 2 glasses of wine that night, loose and happy in a way that made Ryan think, this is what marriage feels like. There was no argument, no tension, no flicker of anything wrong. Just two tired, sunburned newlyweds finishing their last night before the drive home. They got back to the hotel a little after 9. Nothing about the room suggested anything was coming. Their suitcases sat by the door, already half-packed. The rental car sat in the lot below. They scrolled through the day's photos together, Emily narrating which ones she wanted printed, which frame would look right in the hallway. Ryan listened the way a man listens when he assumes he has 50 more years to hear the same voice talk about small things. Neither of them knew those were some of the last ordinary sentences he'd ever hear her say. Close to midnight, Emily said her head was pounding. It didn't alarm either of them. Long day, salty air, more wine than usual. Ryan called the front desk to ask about a pharmacy, but at that hour, nothing nearby was open. Emily said sleep would fix it. It was such a small, forgettable decision. The kind of decision married people make 1,000 times without a second thought. Ryan let it go because it made sense, because Emily was practical, because there was no reason on earth to think that headache would become a sentence in a police report. That night, nothing in the room hinted at danger. No broken lock, no raised voices, no stranger's shadow in the hallway. To Ryan, it was simply the third night of his honeymoon. By sunrise, it would become the morning that never really ended. He woke sometime around 3 a.m. and reached for her out of habit before his mind caught up to what his hand already knew. She wasn't there. At first, he wasn't afraid. People get up in hotel rooms. Water, bathroom, restlessness. He waited for the ordinary explanation to present itself. Didn't. The bathroom was empty. The little sitting nook by the window was empty. The narrow balcony was empty. And then the details started arriving in the wrong order, the order that makes your stomach drop before your brain understands why. Her purse was still on the dresser, wallet, ID, cash, the receipts from the seafood dinner still folded inside. Her phone sat charging on the nightstand. The rental car keys hadn't moved from the little dish by the door. And her wedding ring, the ring she'd worn every single day since the ceremony, sat in its little dish beside the sink, exactly where she left it before bed. The room didn't look like a woman had fled it in fear. It didn't look like a struggle had happened in it. Nothing was overturned. Nothing was torn. It was, if anything, too still, too composed, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Her nightclothes were still folded on the chair. If she'd left on her own, what had she been wearing when she walked out? If someone had taken her, how had they done it without leaving a single mark behind? Ryan called the front desk. The search moved fast at first: lobby, hallways, elevators, the pool deck, the vending machine alcove, the parking structure. No guest had seen a woman matching her description. No employee remembered her passing through after midnight. Nothing turned up. By 4 in the morning, this had stopped looking like a confused guest wandering the property. The police were called. What they walked into wasn't a typical missing person case. Emily wasn't a runaway teenager or a solo traveler who might have simply changed her mind about a trip. She was 3 days married, vanished from a locked hotel room, every belonging she'd need to survive left behind like she'd never intended to leave at all. The hotel's camera system became the center of everything almost immediately. Cameras covered the lobby, the main entrance, the elevator bank, the parking lot. Investigators pulled the footage from the hours after the couple returned from dinner and watched Ryan and Emily walk in together, tired and happy, a little after 9. After that, nothing. No frame of Emily walking back out. No frame of anyone escorting her anywhere. The front desk had been staffed the entire night. The elevators had been monitored. The lot showed no sign of her at all. The electronic key card logs made it worse, not better. According to the system, the door hadn't opened again after the couple entered for the night. No record of Emily's card being used to exit. No record of any other key accessing that room. The physical evidence and the digital evidence agreed on exactly one thing. There was no explanation. By dawn, search teams expanded past the hotel to the beach access points, the boardwalk, the strip of shops that lined the road out of town. Because the hotel sat so close to open water, the possibility of an accidental drowning had to be considered. A headache, alcohol, disorientation. someone wandering toward the sound of the waves in the dark. But that theory collapsed almost as fast as it formed. No clothing on the shoreline. No witness near the water. No route from the room to the beach that explained the missing footage. Emily was cautious by nature. The idea of her walking into darkness alone, barefoot, without her phone, without a reason, didn't fit anyone who actually knew her. By sunrise, Ryan Whitfield was no longer a groom finishing a honeymoon. He was the husband of a missing woman, and nothing that followed would ever fully let him go back to being anything else. Ryan didn't drive home when the reservation ended. The bags that should have gone back to Colorado stayed zipped and waiting by a door that wasn't his own anymore. He spent the following 2 weeks in Alabama with a case number, a stack of unanswered questions, and a face, Emily's face, starting to appear on flyers taped to gas station windows before their marriage had even had the chance to become routine. Detectives interviewed hotel staff, service workers, taxi drivers, anyone who might have been on shift or on the road at that hour. They asked the same handful of questions over and over because there was nothing else to ask. Had anyone seen her? Had anyone heard anything? Had any vehicle left the lot at an odd hour? Nothing ever changed the shape of the answer. Gone, without a trace, without a route, without a witness. Search volunteers appeared once the local news picked up the story, and Emily's photo, the honeymoon photo, the one from the beach shoot that afternoon, went up in gas stations, diners, church bulletin boards, laundromats. It was a strange kind of tragedy to watch play out, because Emily didn't look like an old missing person mugshot. She looked like a woman whose life was supposed to still be happening. Investigators floated theories the way investigators do when the truth refuses to show itself. An accidental drowning, ruled increasingly unlikely by the absence of any physical trace. An abduction undermined by the total lack of forced entry, of any ransom demand, of any single piece of physical evidence that a stranger had been in that room at all. Whoever or whatever had taken Emily had done it with an unsettling kind of precision, leaving nothing behind for anyone to hold on to. For families like Ryan's, that absence becomes its own particular cruelty. No body meant no answers, but it also meant no permission to grieve. He went home to Colorado because the investigation demanded it, not because any part of him had accepted anything. Their apartment sat exactly as they'd left it before the wedding. Wedding gifts half unwrapped, thank you cards half written. The curtains they'd argued gently about still folded in a bag by the closet. Every object in that apartment was a sentence that had been cut off mid-word. The honeymoon photos were the cruelest of all. Proof that Emily had been laughing, sunburned, and completely alive only hours before she disappeared. Ryan's business began to slip almost immediately. He missed calls. He canceled jobs. Clients were sympathetic for a while, the way people are sympathetic to a tragedy that hasn't become their problem yet. But a small electrical business doesn't run on sympathy. He kept driving back to Alabama whenever there was a reason. A new lead, a reporter, a volunteer search, and sometimes for no reason at all because staying in Colorado felt like abandoning her all over again. In 2006, once the official case had cooled and the news trucks had gone home, Ryan hired a private investigator with money he couldn't really spare. The investigator dug through Emily's life before the wedding, friendships, banking records, phone activity, anything that might suggest she'd planned to disappear. Nothing surfaced. No secret account. No hidden ticket. No confession to a friend. Her co-workers described pre-wedding jitters. Nothing more. The investigation gave Ryan nothing except the confirmation that there was, in fact, nothing to find. By 2007, a woman's sandal turned up near a stretch of beach not far from the hotel. The right brand, close to the right size. For one unbearable week, the case seemed to tilt toward an answer. Then it collapsed again. The sandal had been exposed too long, handled too many times, tied to nothing else. No second shoe. No remains. No forensic match strong enough to mean anything. It was, in the end, just another object that meant everything and nothing at the same time. A wound reopened for no reason at all. Years did what years do. The story that once led the local news became a short anniversary segment. Then a mention buried in an online archive. Then something people vaguely remembered hearing about once. The world moved on to mortgages and graduations and divorces while Ryan's calendar stayed fixed on one date. Friends started using softer language. You deserve rest. She wouldn't want this for you. And Ryan understood it came from love. But none of them had woken up in that room. None of them had held her wedding ring in their palm and understood, instantly, that something in the universe had gone terribly wrong. Nathan stayed close through all of it, or close enough that everyone assumed he was trying. He called after every dead-end lead. He helped with the legal paperwork nobody wanted to think about. He was steady in the specific way an older brother is supposed to be steady when the younger one is drowning. More than once he told Ryan, gently, that life couldn't stay frozen forever. Ryan never once heard those words as anything but concern. In 2009, Ryan's parents died together in a highway accident outside Denver. The kind of call that splits a life cleanly into before and after. It devastated Ryan not only because they were his parents, but because they'd been part of the small circle of people who still spoke about Emily as a person instead of a case file. His mother had kept Emily's nursing school photo on her nightstand. His father had clipped every newspaper mention for years. Losing them meant losing more of Emily too. Fewer people left who remembered the wedding, the honeymoon plans, the future that had once felt so certain. Nathan handled the funeral logistics with a kind of composure people praised him for. Ryan was grateful to have him. He didn't yet know what that composure was actually protecting. By 2012, Ryan had rebuilt his business into something stable, if smaller than what he'd once imagined. He paid his bills. He showed up. From the outside, people said he seemed better. What they couldn't see was that every year still bent around one date in early autumn, when he drove back to Alabama out of something closer to obligation than choice, walked the same hallways, asked the same questions of anyone who'd still listen. The internet reshaped the search in ways Ryan hadn't anticipated back in 2005. Emily's case migrated from newspaper archives into missing persons forums, true crime message boards, Facebook groups built entirely around unsolved disappearances. Ryan built a simple website, her photo, her timeline, a way for anyone with real information to reach him. That website became both his lifeline and his torment. A tip came from Arizona in 2013. A woman working a grocery register who looked, from certain angles, unsettlingly like Emily. It wasn't her. A tip from Kansas in 2016 suggested she might be living under an assumed name. It wasn't her. Ohio. North Carolina. A bus terminal in Memphis. Every single time, Ryan let himself hope just enough to be devastated all over again. Each false lead didn't just disappoint him. It dragged him straight back to 3 a.m. in that hotel room, forced him to imagine her alive, hidden, afraid, and unreachable, only to collapse back into nothing. In 2019, expanded DNA databases gave families of the missing a new avenue, and Ryan and Emily's parents both submitted samples to be checked against unidentified remains nationwide. The result came back negative, no match anywhere to anyone. For some families, that might have brought relief. For Ryan, it complicated everything. If she wasn't among the unidentified dead, then maybe she was alive somewhere. But if she was alive, why the silence? Why 19 years without a single verified word? The pandemic slowed everything further. Travel, investigations, the annual pilgrimage back to Alabama. Still, Ryan kept the search alive online, reposting her case, updating the age-progressed photos volunteers created for him, asking people gently not to send speculation without something solid behind it. Then, near the end of 2023, a message arrived from a woman who'd worked with Emily years earlier at the hospital. She'd followed the case quietly for almost 2 decades and had hesitated for a long time before finally reaching out, unsure whether what she remembered even mattered anymore. According to her, in the months before the wedding, Emily had seemed unusually on edge, stepping out of conversations to take private calls, looking troubled in a way that didn't quite match ordinary bridal nerves. The coworker remembered Emily once saying, almost offhand, that she'd expected getting married to make her life feel settled, and instead it felt like everything was getting harder to hold together. The coworker had no proof of anything, no name, no explanation, but after years of turning it over in her mind, she felt Ryan deserved to know that whatever had happened to Emily might not have started in that hotel room at all. It might have started months earlier, back home, in a version of the story Ryan had never once considered. October arrived again in 2024 the way it always did, Except this time it landed on Ryan differently. 19 years had passed since Emily disappeared. He was 48 now, gray threading through his hair, his business steady but never the empire he'd once imagined building. He'd never remarried. Friends had stopped trying to introduce him to anyone years ago. Some called it loyalty. Some called it something less kind. Ryan never bothered correcting them, because to him the marriage hadn't ended. It had simply been interrupted mid-sentence, and he was still waiting for the rest of it. That afternoon, an unfamiliar number lit up his phone. Unknown numbers rarely meant anything good anymore. Scam calls, wrong numbers, strangers who'd found his website and wanted to share another uncertain sighting. He almost let it go to voicemail. He answered anyway. The voice was older than the one in his memory, roughened by years he hadn't witnessed. But the name arrived before his doubt could brace him for it. It's Emily. 19 years folded into a single impossible moment. Not a tip. Not a resemblance caught on a grainy photo. A voice claiming to be his wife. She didn't sound confused or performative. She knew details that had never once made the news, the headache, the closed pharmacy, the exact conversation about which photo would go in the hallway. It was her. The shock arrived before anything else could. He'd imagined this call 1,000 times over 19 years, and in every version he'd pictured relief, maybe even fury. What he felt instead was something closer to vertigo, because if she was alive, then every year he'd spent grieving had been simultaneously justified and completely upside down. She told him she was living outside Nashville, Tennessee, under a different name. She said there were things she owed him, things too large for a phone call. And then she gave him one condition. He couldn't tell anyone. Not her parents, not the police yet, and specifically not Nathan. That name changed the entire shape of the call. Nathan had been there through every dead end, every funeral, every anniversary drive back to Alabama. If Emily was afraid of Nathan knowing she'd resurfaced, then Nathan wasn't simply the brother who'd stood beside Ryan through all of it. He was somewhere inside the story itself. She asked him to meet her the next day, alone. It was an unfair ask after 19 years of silence, but Ryan agreed, because refusing felt like risking losing her all over again before he'd even understood what he'd found. The drive to Nashville felt unlike every other drive he'd made chasing false leads. This time the voice on the phone hadn't come from a stranger describing a resemblance. It had come from Emily herself. They met in a quiet corner of a coffee shop she'd chosen. The 27-year-old bride from the beach photos was gone, replaced by a woman carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd spent 2 decades managing a secret. But Ryan knew her anyway. Not cleanly, not the way memory wanted, but enough. She didn't lead with excuses. She led with an apology. For the years, for the searching, for letting his parents die without ever knowing the truth. She said she'd picked up the phone to call him 1,000 times over the years and put it down every single time, afraid of what honesty would cost her. Then she told him what he'd waited 19 years to hear, why. About 6 months before the wedding, overwhelmed by the pressure of the engagement and drowning quietly in her own anxiety about the life ahead of her, Emily had turned to Nathan. Ryan had been buried in work at the time, and Nathan had been steady, familiar, safe in the particular way family feels safe. What began as conversation slowly became something else, an emotional closeness that crossed a line neither of them had meant to cross, and then kept crossing anyway. She said she'd told herself she would end it before the wedding. She said she'd convinced herself that marrying Ryan would put everything back where it belonged. Then came Gulf Shores. Sometime during the honeymoon, Emily realized she was pregnant, and she had no way of knowing whether the child was Ryan's or Nathan's. The joy that should have belonged to those 4 days curdled into something closer to panic. If the baby was Ryan's, she'd nearly wrecked a good man's life for nothing. If the baby was Nathan's, the truth would detonate both families at once. Her career, her name, and a child's entire future before that child had even drawn breath. Fear, she said, made every decision for her after that. And Nathan, already aware she was pregnant, didn't offer her a way to tell the truth. He offered her a way to disappear before the truth could ever surface. That was the moment, sitting across from her in that Nashville coffee shop, that Ryan understood 19 years of mystery had never actually been a mystery. It had been a choice. A cruel, deliberate human choice, protected for nearly 2 decades by the two people he trusted most. She told him the rest slowly, like someone finally setting down something too heavy to keep carrying. Nathan had known exactly where they were staying. The family had known the honeymoon plans all along. Nothing about the itinerary had ever been secret. He drove down to Alabama during the trip and waited for the moment Emily could slip away. The whole plan depended on one thing: staying off camera. She couldn't be seen crossing the lobby with a bag. She couldn't be caught by the front desk. Nathan had a connection, someone who worked hotel maintenance, someone he paid to open a staff corridor that guests were never meant to use, a service route that led out through an exit the main cameras didn't cover. It wasn't some elaborate scheme. It was the kind of overlooked, unremarkable access point that exists in nearly every large hotel. A door built for laundry carts and deliveries, never meant to matter to anyone. That was the whole answer. That was why the lobby camera never caught her. That was why the key card logs showed nothing. That was why 19 years of investigators had run into a wall that was never a wall, just a door nobody thought to ask about. The belongings left behind, the purse, the ring, the phone, hadn't been forgotten. They'd been staged. If she vanished with nothing, it would look like something terrible had happened to her rather than something she'd chosen. Every ounce of Ryan's grief, every year he'd defended her memory against anyone who dared suggest she'd left willingly. All of it had been built, brick by brick, on a lie constructed specifically to be convincing. Something terrible had happened, just not to Emily alone. After leaving the hotel, she got into Nathan's car and left Alabama for good. She didn't call her parents. She didn't call the police. She became, officially, a missing woman, while in reality she was very much alive, hidden, and quietly starting over under a different name in Tennessee. Nathan helped her get set up. Money, a place to stay, enough support to keep the secret buried without ever making it look generous. The baby was born in the spring of 2006. She named him Caleb. For Ryan, that single detail landed differently than everything before it. Up to that point, the child had existed as an abstraction, a consequence of betrayal. A name made him real. Caleb had grown up, gone to school, made friends, filled out forms, asked questions, and lived every single one of those years inside a lie he never had a say in. Nathan helped for a while in the early years, money, quiet support, but he never fully stepped into fatherhood because he genuinely didn't know if Caleb was his son. That uncertainty, which should have forced the truth out into the open immediately, instead became one more reason to keep it buried. As Caleb got older, vague answers stopped being enough. Kids eventually want a name, a history, a reason their paperwork looks different from everyone else's. By the time he reached his last year of high school, college applications and financial aid forms started pulling at threads that vague explanations couldn't hold together anymore. You can hide from neighbors for a long time. You cannot hide forever from institutions that require every box filled in. That, Emily admitted, was the real reason she'd finally called. Not sudden courage. Not a spontaneous attack of conscience. Her son needed a future that wasn't built entirely on a lie, and she no longer had the right to withhold the truth from him. Ryan absorbed all of it in a kind of grief that didn't have one single shape. Fury that she'd waited until paperwork forced her hand. Disgust that Nathan had bought 19 years of silence. And underneath everything, one question louder than the rest. Was Caleb his son? She didn't know. She'd lived 19 years without knowing. Watching Caleb grow up while carrying two competing truths inside one lie. Too afraid of the answer to ever ask for a test. Ryan asked to meet him. A week later, in a quiet diner outside Nashville, Ryan met an 18-year-old who had absolutely no idea his life was about to be rewritten in real time. Caleb had grown up believing his father was simply complicated. A subject his mother avoided with the same tired flinch every time it came up. He had no idea those gaps had names, dates, and a police file behind them. Ryan didn't treat him like a piece of evidence. Caleb was a person. A young man standing at the edge of a truth that had been kept from him since before he was born. The conversation was careful and unfinished, because no single sitting could hold 19 years of concealment. But Caleb learned enough to understand why this stranger had driven 300 miles to find him, and he asked for the DNA test himself, because he wanted truth more than he wanted comfort. The results came back within days. Caleb was Ryan's son. The years didn't get less painful in that instant, but they got less empty. The child hidden from him for nearly 2 decades wasn't the product of betrayal. He was the son of the marriage Emily had run from. Ryan hadn't only lost a wife to that hotel room. He'd lost 18 years of a childhood he never knew existed, birthdays, report cards, first days of school. Every ordinary moment other fathers complain about while secretly treasuring them. And yet, Caleb hadn't chosen any of this. He hadn't asked to be born into a lie, raised under a false story, and handed the truth only once paperwork forced everyone's hand. He'd lost a father too, even if he hadn't known enough to name what was missing. There was one more conversation left, and Ryan knew he couldn't put it off. He drove to see Nathan alone. No police, no Emily, no Caleb. Just 2 brothers, though the word didn't sit right in his mouth anymore. Nathan didn't try to deny anything. He admitted the relationship with Emily had started before the wedding, admitted the panic that followed the pregnancy, admitted arranging the hotel exit, paying the maintenance worker, helping her get settled in Tennessee, sending money in those early years before quietly pulling away because he couldn't live near the secret anymore without it consuming him. He'd since married someone else and tried to bury the past under the appearance of an ordinary life. Ryan understood immediately that this confession, however honest, had arrived 19 years too late to count as courage. It hadn't spared him a single year of searching. It hadn't given Caleb a father any sooner. It hadn't let their parents die knowing the truth. Regret that shows up only after the consequences are unavoidable isn't bravery. It's just what's left when hiding stops working. But rage didn't hand Ryan any clean answers either. Nathan was guilty. Nathan was also his brother, one of the only people left alive who remembered their childhood, their parents, the shape of a family that no longer fully existed. Ryan couldn't pretend that history meant nothing. He also couldn't pretend it made Nathan safe. So he made one decision first before any other. Caleb came before everyone. Not Emily. Not Nathan. Not the wreckage of the past. Caleb had entered the truth last and had the most future left to protect. With Emily, Ryan didn't offer quick forgiveness. He made clear that anything resembling a relationship going forward would require total honesty, with no more managed half-truths dressed up as protection. She accepted that the 27-year-old bride and the 29-year-old groom from Gulf Shores were both gone for good. Whatever came next would have to be built from the truth, not rebuilt from memory. With Nathan, Ryan chose distance. Not a dramatic, public severing, just distance. Nathan wouldn't be part of decisions about Caleb. He wouldn't be welcomed back into the center of Ryan's life simply because he'd finally told the truth. Forgiveness, if it ever came, wouldn't mean restoration. Some things, Ryan realized, can be forgiven without ever being rebuilt. By the following spring, Ryan understood something he never could have grasped as a young groom standing at that little chapel outside Boulder. A life can start again without ever becoming clean again. No apology returns 18 missed birthdays. No confession undoes 19 years of believing your wife might be dead. No family meeting rebuilds trust that took 2 decades to destroy. Still, he refused to let the rest of his life stay chained to that one hotel room. He, Emily, and Caleb slowly built something new outside Chattanooga. Not a return to Colorado, where every street held a memory of the life before, and not anywhere near the Gulf Coast, where the wound had first opened. Just somewhere quiet enough to breathe, close enough to Caleb's college plans, ordinary enough that they didn't have to explain themselves to every neighbor. They never pretended to be a perfect family, because pretending was exactly what had cost them 19 years in the first place. There were documents to fix, records to correct, hard conversations about medical history and financial aid, and everything else that a childhood built on half-truths leaves tangled behind it. Forms could be corrected easily. Trust took much longer, rebuilt slowly, one honest choice at a time, in the absence of a single new lie. Ryan learned that fatherhood at 48 wasn't the fatherhood he would have had at 29. Caleb wasn't a child waiting to be claimed. He was a young man with his own opinions, his own wounds, his own need for space. Love could be offered freely. Trust had to arrive on its own schedule. Emily's place in the new arrangement was more fragile. She'd spent 19 years surviving by hiding, and now survival meant the opposite. Answering hard questions honestly, accepting that forgiveness couldn't be scheduled or requested, understanding that guilt didn't entitle her to comfort. She didn't ask Ryan to forget. She knew forgetting would just be another lie wearing a gentler face. Nathan stayed at the edges. Some relatives thought Ryan should cut him off entirely. Others thought blood eventually forgives anything. Ryan didn't fully agree with either camp. Nathan was still his brother. He just wasn't anymore a safe place. Every October, they went back to Gulf Shores together. At first, Caleb didn't understand why his father would choose to return to the place where everything had broken. For Ryan, it was never about reopening the wound. It was about refusing to let the worst night of his life stay the only meaning that place would ever hold. The hotel where the lie began became, eventually, the place where the family chose to face what that lie had cost. Standing there each year, Ryan thought about the 29-year-old he'd been. The one who believed love meant certainty, who trusted his brother completely, who had no idea he'd spend nearly 2 decades searching for a woman who was never actually lost. He stopped blaming that younger version of himself. Innocent people often carry guilt for lies they never told. He thought about forgiveness differently now, too. For years, he'd imagined it as a single dramatic decision, a door swinging open all at once. Real forgiveness, when it finally came, was quieter than that. It didn't erase memory. It didn't restore trust. It wasn't a gift handed to the people who'd hurt him. It was a decision not to let that hurt run every day he had left. He didn't forgive because Emily deserved an easy ending, or because Nathan's late regret was enough. He forgave because Caleb deserved a father who wasn't consumed by bitterness, and because Ryan himself deserved a future that wasn't permanently anchored to one hotel room in Alabama. 19 years had been taken from him, but not everything. Not his ability to choose who he'd become on the other side of the truth. Not Caleb's chance to finally know where he came from. Not the stubborn, imperfect possibility that a broken family can still learn to live honestly once the pretending finally stops. Their story would never be the clean, simple kind people prefer. It began with a wedding, fractured through betrayal, survived on silence for nearly 2 decades, and came back into the light through a son who deserved so much better than every adult in his life had given him. But maybe that's exactly why it mattered. Real families aren't always built on perfect beginnings. Sometimes they're built by people willing to look directly at the damage, name it honestly, and choose, even after everything, not to walk away from each other. Ryan never got back the life that vanished from that hotel room in 2005. But he built another one. And that life, imperfect as it was, taught him something he never could have understood as a young man standing at the altar. The truth can arrive decades too late and still matter. Love can come back wounded and still be real. Forgiveness might never undo what was broken, but a human heart, given enough time and enough honesty, can still grow larger than the thing that once broke it. Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. If the story moved you, it's because somewhere in it you recognize something true, about silence, about the cost of hiding, about how long the truth can wait and still be worth telling. We hope it reminds you to hold the people close to you a little tighter, to choose honesty before silence gets too heavy to lift, and to believe that even after the deepest kind of hurt, a new beginning is still possible. If this story touched you, take a moment to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so we can keep bringing you stories like this one. Thank you for being here.